Hello, this is the second part of my summary of organizational transformation in the Western Baha'i communities, roughly from 1922 through to 1934. It comes from an essay I wrote a long time ago, published in 2004, The Baha'i Faith in the West, a survey. There's also a very brief reference in my book, The Babi and Baha'i Religions. I'll give the details below the video. These administrative changes took place with the approval and often at the express instruction of Shoghi Effendi. As such, they constitute part of his transformation of the faith. At the same time, however, they initially took place within the context of an American Baha'i community in which there were existing tensions regarding organization, and these tensions were naturally reflected in the manner in which the administrative changes proceeded. Central to this tension were two divergent conceptions of the Baha'i religion and collateral divergent attitudes about the nature of organization. The conceptual tension is partly rooted in the Baha'i writings and can still be found in contemporary discourse, in the claim that the Baha'i faith is both, first, an independent divine revelation, and secondly, simultaneously, the fulfillment of prophecies associated with the religions of the past, with which it forms a single and integral religion of God. In the early American Baha'i community, these claims led to what were essentially rival exclusivist and inclusivist conceptions of the religion. Please note that those are my terms, and they were certainly not used by the American Baha'is themselves, either then or now. So, inclusivism and exclusivism. Those who were inclusivists, in my language, in my terms, saw the Baha'i teachings as an all-embracing spiritual philosophy. For them, the Baha'i movement was the universal spirit of the age that was also infused to all progressive religious and social movements, all of whose members, it was thought, should work together to bring about the spiritual transformation of the world. From this perspective, being a Baha'i was a matter of sharing this attitude and did not entail membership of a particular religious organization. By contrast, the more exclusivist Baha'is viewed their religion as being based on the revelations of Baha'u'llah. Being a Baha'i therefore entailed specific adherence to Baha'u'llah's cause and obedience to his teachings. By itself, general acceptance of the Baha'i principles was not enough. These contrasting attitudes tended to be linked to divergent attitudes towards authority and hence towards organization. Thus, the more inclusivist Baha'is were inclined towards what I've termed an epistemological individualism, in which the preferred final locus of doctrinal and organizational authority was the individual. Some degree of organization might be necessary, but it should be loosely structured and not curtail individualism. By contrast, the exclusivists were generally inclined to what I've again termed an epistemological authoritarianism, in which there were clearly established bases of authority beyond the individual. Correspondingly, they favored the concepts of doctrinal orthodoxy and of regular procedures of organization that should be followed. There was also a linkage between these divergent attitudes and membership in the so-called cultic milieu of the metaphysical movements. Many early Baha'is were drawn from this background, and inclusivist Baha'is often retained their links within it, continuing the universalistic and individualistic attitudes that were generally characteristic of that milieu. The Baha'i exclusivists, by contrast, tended to be unsympathetic towards this milieu and to Baha'i linkages with it. As far as can be discerned, these divergent attitudes coexisted within the American Baha'i community from 1900 to the early 1930s. This diversity within the community is remarkable and can be largely attributed to the unusual nature of Abdu'l-Bahá's leadership, which combined a forceful claim to charismatic authority with a highly permissive style of leadership, together with an appeal on the basis of Christian millennial fulfillment combined with the liberal social and religious teachings of the New Age. Common devotion to Abdu'l-Bahá was able to unite a highly diverse Baha'i community. The implicit tension between these two attitudes was expressed in the opposition of many early Baha'is towards the development of any strong form of organization. Flexible and relatively non-directive form of organization that did develop allowed the two attitudes to continue to coexist. However, when the American Baha'is were cut off from Abdu'l-Bahá and his encouraging guidance during the First World War, tensions became explicit, and an inclusivist cultic group of Baha'is, the Chicago Reading Room, was expelled from the Baha'i community by a well-organized group of exclusivist Baha'is. Abdu'l-Bahá later sought to reconcile the divergent groups when communications were restored at the end of the war, but a polarization of attitudes within the American Baha'i community seems to have occurred. The establishment of the administrative order completed this process of polarization. The changes were welcome to the more exclusivist Baha'is, who gave their support to the new administrative institutions and gravitated towards membership in and leadership of them. The inclusivists found their views increasingly less influential within the Baha'i community. Many were prepared to accept the changes, concentrating their efforts on teaching, perhaps, rather than administration, but others became apathetic or inactive, whilst a small minority came out in outright opposition. There was a gradual but far-reaching transformation of the community. An ethos of what I would term organizational exclusivism came to replace the universalistic and individualistic attitudes that had been prevalent earlier. The opponents of organization were able to attract a fair amount of attention, especially in the late 1920s, when the American administration was becoming firmly established. They articulated disaffection, but did not gain a large following. They were a diverse group. Harrison Gray Dyer, the editor of the New York-based Baha'i magazine, Ruth White, an active Baha'i teacher, and Ahmad Sohrab, Abdu'l-Bahá's former secretary and interpreter. Dyer and White publicly attacked the new administration and derided Shoghi Effendi, hence putting themselves far beyond the pale of Baha'i orthodoxy. But they weren't able to offer an attractive and coherent alternative to the Baha'i mainstream. Sohrab's critique was more sophisticated, and his liberal and universalistic New History Society remained active for many years after he'd been excommunicated effectively from the Baha'i community. Outside of North America, the only Western Baha'i community to experience outright opposition to the growing administrative order was Germany, where a minority of Baha'is under Wilhelm Herrigel formed themselves into a breakaway Baha'i World Union. As in North America, a basic transformation of attitude on the part of the Baha'i community as a whole eventually occurred, however. Exclusivism and a more directive system of administration came to be the norm. A similar change was experienced in Britain and Australia, the only other Western Baha'i communities of any size, but without any movements of opposition developing. There was also a gradual abandonment of the term Baha'i movement, which had been widely used up to the 1920s. Instead, Baha'is increasingly referred to their religion in English as the Baha'i faith or the Baha'i cause. So, if you want a general overview of Baha'i history, there's my old Babi and Baha'i religions book from Cambridge, originally came out in 1987. Then there's also my short history from One World. More general accounts of the Baha'i religion, you get my Cambridge introduction and a concise encyclopedia of the Baha'i faith. So many thanks to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. And if you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Like, comment and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll talk about systematic planning in the early Western Baha'i communities. Have a good day.